Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and felt every eye in the docking bay turn toward him. The alien cadets stopped their conversations and stared. Some whispered to each other in languages he didn't understand. Others just looked disgusted. He was used to it by now. Being the first human at Kepler Academy meant being the freak show everywhere he went. Jake adjusted his duffel bag on his shoulder and walked toward the academy entrance. His boots made heavy sounds on the metal floor. The alien cadets moved out of his way like he carried some disease. The academy was huge. It floated in space. Around the gas giant Nexus Prime, and through the giant windows, Jake could see the planet's swirling storms. The hallways were wide and clean, with moving walkways and floating signs that changed languages as different species walked by. Everything looked expensive and perfect. Jake had grown up on Titan, one of Saturn's moons. There, everything was dirty and broken, and you fixed it yourself, or it stayed broken. His hands were rough from working in the mining tunnels since he was 12. His clothes were clean but old. He looked like exactly what he was, a kid from the rough parts of space, Cadet Morrison. The voice came from behind him. Jake turned and saw a tall reptile-like alien in a commander's uniform. The alien's skin was green and scaly, and his yellow eyes looked at Jake like he was studying a bug. "I am Commander Veltar. Follow me." They walked through more perfect hallways. Other cadets moved aside when they saw the commander. Jake noticed how the alien students were different from each other. Some looked like living crystals that caught the light. Others were tall and thin with too many arms. A few looked like giant insects walking on their back legs. "You are wondering why you are here," Commander Veltar said without looking back. His voice sounded like gravel in a mixer. "The recruitment officer said I qualified for the Void Walker program," Jake said. Veltar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Yes, the politicians decided we needed to include a human in our elite survival training, to show how fair and open the Federation is." He stopped walking and turned to face Jake. "I think it is a waste of time. Humans are violent primitives from a death world. You will fail, and then we can go back to training real soldiers." Jake felt his face get hot, but he kept his mouth shut. Getting angry wouldn't help anything. They reached a large room with a curved ceiling that showed the stars outside. About 20 alien cadets sat in floating chairs arranged in a circle. They all turned to look when Jake walked in. "Cadets," Veltar said, "meet your new classmate, Cadet Jake Morrison from Earth." A few of the aliens made disgusted sounds. One of them, who looked like she was made of blue crystal, actually moved her chair farther away from where Jake was supposed to sit. "Now then," Veltar continued, "we will discuss your final survival exercise. Each of you will be sent alone to complete a mission on Kithara 7. Jake had heard of Kithara 7. It was a frozen moon with storms that could freeze you solid in minutes. Mining crews called it the Ice Hell. "The mission is simple," Veltar said. "You will land at coordinates Alpha 7. You will make your way to the abandoned research station. You will retrieve the data cores and return to the pickup point. You have 72 hours. One of the insect-like cadets raised a clawed hand. "Commander, what about the weather conditions?" "Kithara 7 is experiencing its thermal season. Methane storms, temperature drops to -200 degrees, and unstable ground conditions." Veltar's yellow eyes found Jake. "Of course, if anyone feels this mission is too dangerous, they can withdraw from the program now." Jake met the commander's stare. "I'm ready, sir." "Excellent." Veltar smiled, showing too many sharp teeth. "Morrison, since you are so eager, you will go first, tomorrow morning." The crystal cadet, who Jake heard someone call Zix-Ala, whispered to the insect cadet next to her. "The human won't last 6 hours on Kithara 7. The insect cadet, whose name tag read Thrumok, clicked his mandibles. It is cruel to send him to die just to prove a point. Jake pretended not to hear them. After the briefing ended, he walked to his quarters alone. The room was small but clean, with a window that looked out at the gas giant's storms. He sat on the narrow bed and thought about tomorrow. He wasn't stupid. He knew Veltar wanted him to fail. The commander had probably chosen the worst possible conditions on purpose. But Jake had grown up in places that would kill most of these alien cadets in minutes. Titan's mining tunnels were full of poisonous gas, crushing pressure and equipment that exploded if you looked at it wrong. A soft chime sounded at his door. Jake opened it to find a human woman in a lieutenant's uniform. She was maybe 30, with short brown hair and tired eyes. "I'm Lieutenant Amy Brooks," she said. "I'm your liaison officer. May I come in?" Jake stepped aside to let her enter. She looked around the small room and nodded. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "That they're setting you up to fail." "Are they?" "Probably." Amy sat down in the room's only chair. "Veltar has been against human admission to the academy from the beginning. He thinks we're too dangerous and unpredictable. So why don't you stop him?" "Because proving him wrong is better than complaining about it." Amy leaned forward. "Jake, I've read your file. You survived things on Titan that would have killed most people. You're resourceful, tough, and stubborn as hell. Use that." She stood up to leave, then turned back. "One more thing. The other species here, they're not evil. They're just scared. Humans have a reputation in the galaxy as crazy survivors who never give up. That scares them because they don't understand it." After she left, Jake lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would go to one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy. Everyone expected him to fail. Most of them wanted him to fail. He thought about his home on Titan, about working 14-hour shifts in the mines when he was still a teenager, about the time the tunnel collapsed and he spent 3 days digging himself out with a broken shovel, about all the times people had told him he wasn't good enough, smart enough, strong enough. Jake smiled in the dark. Let them think what they wanted. Tomorrow, he would show them what humans could do. The drop pod shook like it was trying to tear itself apart. Jake gripped the safety harness and watched the warning lights flash red all around him. The computer voice kept repeating the same message over and over. Navigation system failure. Landing trajectory compromised. Through the small window, Jake could see Kithara 7 getting bigger fast. The moon looked like a dirty snowball covered in swirling clouds. Lightning flashed inside the methane storms that covered most of the surface. "Come on," Jake muttered, trying to work the manual controls. But the pod systems were fried. Something had gone wrong during the launch, and now he was falling toward the moon with no way to steer. The pod hit the atmosphere and started to burn. Jake felt the heat through the walls as the vehicle screamed through the frozen air. The computer gave up trying to talk and just made angry beeping sounds. Jake closed his eyes and thought about home, about his mom telling him to be careful when he left for the academy, about his little sister saying she was proud of him. If he died here, they would never know what really happened. The impact felt like getting hit by a freight train. Jake's head snapped forward and everything went black. When he woke up, the pod was buried nose first in a snowbank. Ice covered the cracked window, and Jake could hear wind howling outside. The temperature gauge showed minus 150 degrees. His breath made fog clouds inside the pod. Jake checked himself for injuries. His head hurt and his shoulder was sore, but nothing seemed broken. The pod's emergency systems were still working, keeping the inside warm enough to survive. But the battery indicator showed only 6 hours of power left. He activated the emergency beacon and got static. Either the signal wasn't getting through, the storm, or there was nobody listening. Jake looked at the navigation display and felt his stomach drop. Instead of landing at coordinates Alpha 7 near the research station, he was 200 kilometers away in the middle of nowhere. "Perfect," he said to the empty pod. Jake put on his survival suit and checked his equipment. The impact had scattered most of his gear around the pod's interior. He found his emergency food, water recycler, and basic tools. His laser cutter was broken, and half his rations were smashed, but he had enough to last 3 days if he was careful. The pod's airlock cycled open with a hiss of escaping warm air. Jake stepped outside into Hell. The wind hit him like a physical blow, carrying ice crystals that felt like needles against his faceplate. The landscape was nothing but white hills and black rocks under a dark sky. In the distance, he could see the methane storms moving like living things across the frozen ground. Jake oriented himself using the pod's navigation system before the battery died completely. The research station was northwest, 200 kilometers across some of the worst terrain on the moon. At walking speed, it would take him at least 4 days to get there. He had food for 3. He gathered his scattered equipment and started walking. The gravity on Cathara 7 was lighter than Earth's, but the deep snow made every step hard work. Jake found a rhythm and tried not to think about how far he had to go. After 2 hours of walking, he stopped to rest behind a large rock that blocked some of the wind. He was checking his water recycler when his suit's motion detector started beeping. Something was moving out there in the storm. Jake crouched lower behind the rock and watched the scanner. 3 contacts moving fast across the snow toward his position. They were big, maybe the size of large dogs, and they moved in a pattern that looked organized. The first one appeared out of the swirling snow like a ghost. It was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The creature looked like a cross between a Volth and a spider, with 6 legs that ended in sharp claws. Its fur was white as the snow around it, and its eyes glowed blue in the dim light. When it opened its mouth, Jake could see rows of teeth like broken glass. 2 more appeared on either side of the first one. They were surrounding him. Jake had no weapons except a small utility knife and some basic tools. The creatures were fast, and they had claws and teeth. But Jake had grown up fighting things that wanted to kill him. On Titan, the mining tunnels were full of gas forms that could bite through metal. He picked up a sharp piece of metal from his scattered equipment and waited. The creatures moved closer, making a sound like broken wind chimes. They were smart. Enough to coordinate their attack. The first one leaped at him with its claws extended. Jake rolled to the side and swung the metal shard at its face. The creature yelped and jumped back, blue blood dripping from a cut across its snout. The other 2 attacked from both sides. Jake grabbed a handful of snow and threw it at the nearest one's eyes, and kicked out at the other with his heavy boot. The kick connected with the creature's ribs and sent it tumbling across the snow. But there were more coming. Jake could see shapes moving in the storm, drawn by the sounds of fighting. He needed to get out of there fast. Jake ran. The creatures followed, their claws clicking on the ice as they bounded through the snow. He could hear them getting closer, their breathing, like steam engines in the cold air. Ahead, Jake saw a cliff face with what looked like a cave opening. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning in the thin air. Behind him, one of the creatures was close enough that he could hear its growling. Jake dove into the cave just as claws raked across the back of his suit. The creatures tried to follow, but the opening was too small for their bodies. They paced back and forth outside, making frustrated noises. The cave was deeper than it looked. Jake activated his helmet light and explored carefully. The walls were covered with strange ice formations, and the floor was littered with bones. Some of the bones looked fresh. In the back of the cave, Jake found something interesting. Metal panels were built into the rock wall, covered with writing in a language he didn't recognize. This wasn't a natural cave. Someone had built this place, activated his suit's translator, and waited while it tried to decode the writing. After a few minutes, words appeared on his helmet display. Emergency Shelter Beta 4. Dr. Elena Hayes, Xenobiology Research Team. There was more text below. Warning: native predators show pack behavior and high intelligence. Avoid surface travel during thermal seasons. Evacuation recommended. Jake laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Thanks for the warning, Doc. 2. Bad I got it after meeting the neighbors. He checked his chronometer. He had been on the moon for 6 hours, and he was already lost, nearly killed, and hiding in a cave. The research station was still almost 200 kilometers away, but Jake was still alive, and that was what mattered. He settled down in the back of the cave to wait for the creatures to leave. While he waited, he read more of Dr. Hayes' notes. Creatures were called ice runners, and they were the reason the research station was abandoned. During Kithara 7's thermal seasons, when underground heat sources became active, the ice runners became extremely aggressive and hunted in large packs. Jake was reading about ice runner behavior patterns when his suit's communication system crackled to life. For a moment, he thought it was rescue, but the signal was wrong. It was an emergency beacon broadcasting on the Academy's frequency. The message was broken and full of static, but Jake could make out enough words to understand what had happened. The training ship Stellar Wind had been hit by a solar flare and crashed somewhere on Kithara 7. Commander Veltar and 12 cadets were trapped in the wreckage with failing life support. Jake stared at the communication display and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The people who had wanted him to fail, who had sent him here to die, were now dying themselves, and he was the only one in position to help them. Outside the cave, the ice runners were still waiting. Jake listened to the emergency signal repeat 3 more times before he made his decision. The smart thing would be to continue to the research station, complete his mission, and call for rescue. The crashed ship was not his problem, but Jake had never been good at doing the smart thing. He waited in the cave until the ice runners moved on, then carefully made his way back outside. The storm had gotten worse, and the wind tried to knock him down with every step. Jake activated his suit's navigation system and plotted a new course. The crash site was 40 kilometers southeast of his position, in the opposite direction from the research station. If he went there first, he would use up most of his food and water. He might not have enough supplies left to reach the original target. Jake started walking anyway. The landscape of Kithara 7 was like nothing he had ever seen. Huge ice formations stuck up from the snow like frozen trees. In some places, the ground was cracked open by geothermal vents that leaked steam and strange-smelling gases. Jake's radiation detector clicked occasionally, warning him to stay away from certain areas. After 3 hours of walking, he reached the research station. The building was half buried in snow and ice, but the main structure looked intact. Jake forced open the emergency airlock and stepped inside. His helmet lights revealed a laboratory filled with abandoned equipment and overturned furniture. Emergency power was still running, giving Jake heat and breathable air. He pulled off his helmet and took his first real breath since leaving the cave. The air tasted stale but clean. Jake explored the station methodically. The main lab was full of scientific equipment he didn't recognize, but the storage areas had things he could use. He found thermal heaters, emergency food packets, and a medical kit. Best of all, he found a maintenance locker full of tools and spare parts. In Dr. Hayes' office, Jake found her personal logs. The scientist had been studying Kithara 7's native life forms when the ice runner attacks started. Her final entries described increasingly aggressive behavior from the creatures as the thermal season approached. Day 47. Highs recorded. Voice said from the computer. The ice runners are showing coordinated hunting behavior, unlike anything in our previous observations. They seem to be communicating through subsonic calls. Evacuation request has been approved. We leave tomorrow. Jake scrolled through the files and found detailed maps of Cathara 7's surface. The crash site was marked in a valley between two thermal vents, an area Dr. Hayes had labeled as High Ice Runner Activity Zone. Of course it is, Jake muttered. He spent the next 2 hours gathering supplies and equipment. The station's fabrication unit was still working, so Jake used it to make some modifications to his gear. He welded spikes to his boots for better traction on ice. He turned the maintenance laser into a crude weapon by removing the safety limiters. He even found materials to make better insulation for his suit. The most important thing he found was a sled in the station's garage. It was designed for moving equipment across the ice, with runners that could handle rough terrain. Jake loaded it with supplies, including several thermal heaters and extra food. Before leaving, Jake recorded a message on the station's communication system. If rescue teams ever made it to Cathara 7, they would know where he had gone and why. "This is Cadet Jake Morrison," he said to the recorder. "I have received a distress signal from the training ship Stellar Wind. I am proceeding to the crash site to render assistance. My current position is the abandoned research station at coordinates Alpha 7. Jake pulled his helmet back on and stepped outside into the storm. The sled was heavy, but the low gravity made it manageable to pull. He checked his navigation system one more time and started southeast toward the crash site. The journey was the hardest thing Jake had ever done. The wind never stopped, and the temperature kept dropping. Ice formed on his faceplate, and he had to stop every hour to clear it off. The sled caught on rocks and ice formations, forcing him to backtrack and find new routes. Worst of all were the ice runners. They followed him from a distance, just far enough away that his motion detector could barely pick them up. Sometimes he could see their glowing eyes in the storm, watching him. They were smart enough to know he was heading somewhere, and they were waiting for him to get tired. Jake walked for 18 hours straight, stopping only to eat and check his equipment. His legs felt like rubber, and his back ached from pulling the sled, but he kept moving. On Titan, the mining crews had a saying, "Pain is temporary, but quitting lasts forever." As he got closer to the crash site, the terrain became more dangerous. The thermal vents were more active here, creating areas of unstable ground that could collapse without warning. Jake had to test each step carefully, probing ahead with a metal rod. The ice runners were getting bolder, too. They had stopped following from a distance and were now moving in circles around him, like sharks around a wounded fish. Jake counted at least 8 of them, maybe more hidden in the storm. When Jake finally saw the crashed ship, he almost missed it. The stellar wind had hit the ground so hard that most of it was buried in snow and debris. Only the top section of the hull was visible, along with one twisted engine. NACELLE. Jake pulled the sled to the edge of the crash site and looked down into the crater. The ship had hit nose first and skidded for almost a kilometer before coming to rest against a rock formation. Emergency lights blinked weakly along the hull, but most of the ship was dark. The ice runners had followed him to the crater's edge. They stood in a loose circle around the crash site, their blue eyes reflecting the emergency lights. Jake realized they had been waiting here all along. The crashed ship was like a trap, drawing in anyone who tried to help. Jake activated his suit's communication system and tried to contact the survivors. After several attempts, he got a weak response. "This is Commander Veltar," came a static-filled voice. "Who is this?" "Cadet Morrison, sir. I'm here to help." There was a long pause. "Morrison? You should be at the research station. I got your distress signal. What's your status?" Another pause, longer this time. Life support is failing. We have maybe 12 hours of air left. The ship's hull is cracked, and we cannot risk EVA suits in our condition. Jake looked at the crashed ship and the ice runners surrounding it. Getting to the survivors would mean fighting his way through the pack and somehow getting everyone out safely. Sir, I have supplies and equipment. I'm coming. Down, Morrison. That is not an order. You are not required to. Jake turned off the communicator. He had heard enough. The people inside that ship had never wanted him at the academy. They had thought he was a primitive from a death world, but that didn't matter now. They needed help, and he was the only one who could give it. Jake unloaded his weapons and supplies from the sled. He checked the power levels on his modified laser cutter and made sure his improvised spikes were secure. Then he started down into the crater toward the crashed ship. The ice runners moved to intercept him. Their subsonic calls echoed across the crater like the sound of breaking glass. Jake counted 12 of them now, all moving with the coordinated precision of a pack that had hunted together for years. All right, Jake said to himself. Let's see what humans can do. The first ice runner attacked before Jake was halfway down the crater. It came at him from the left, claws extended and teeth bared. Jake swung his modified laser cutter in a wide arc, and the beam sliced through the creature's front leg. It screamed and rolled away, leaving blue blood on the snow. The rest of the pack spread out around him, moving with careful intelligence. They had learned from the first attack. These weren't mindless beasts. They were predators who knew how to hunt. Jake reached the bottom of the crater and ran toward the crashed ship. Behind him, the ice runners followed in a coordinated pursuit. Their claws scraped against the ice. As they bounded after him, making a sound like breaking bones, the ship's emergency airlock was buried under tons of snow and debris. Jake would have to find another way in. He ran along the hull, looking for any opening, while laser fire from his cutter kept the ice runners at bay. Near the ship's engineering section, Jake found a hull breach that had been sealed with emergency foam. He cut through the foam with his laser and squeezed inside just as claws raked across the back of his suit. The inside of the ship was a disaster. Conduits hung from the ceiling like dead snakes, and emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows. Jake followed the main corridor toward the front of the ship, where the distress signal was coming from. He found them in what used to be the ship's briefing room. 12 alien cadets and Commander Voltar were huddled together in an emergency shelter that looked like a large tent made of silver fabric. The shelter was connected to the ship's emergency life support, but Jake could see that the air recyclers were failing. Morrison, Commander Voltar's voice was weak. Through the shelter's transparent panel, Jake could see that the reptilian officer was badly injured. His green scales were pale, and there was dried blood around a head wound. Sir, I'm here to get you out, Jake said, activating the shelter's airlock. Inside the shelter, the smell of fear and recycled air was overwhelming. The alien cadets looked terrible. Zixala, the crystal cadet, was barely glowing, a sign that her energy was almost gone. Thrumok, the insect warrior, had one arm hanging useless at his side. The others were in various states of injury and exhaustion. You should not have come, Beltar said. This was not your mission. With respect, sir, the mission changed when you crashed. A human voice spoke from the back of the shelter. About time someone showed up. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Clark was the ship's only human crew member. He was older than Jake, maybe 40, with graying hair and the kind of scars that came from years in dangerous places. Chief, Jake said, what's the situation? Life support dies in 8 hours, maybe less. Hull breach in 3 places, so we can't just wait for rescue. And those things outside had been prowling around the ship since we crashed. Jake looked around at the survivors. Half of them were too injured to move quickly, and the others were weak from oxygen deprivation. Getting them all out would be like moving a field hospital through a war zone. "I have supplies and equipment outside," Jake said. "Thermal heaters, food, medical supplies. But first, we need to deal with the ice runners." Thrumok raised his good arm. "I can fight. Chitauri warriors do not hide while others face danger." "No offense, but you can barely stand," Jake said. "I need you to help the others stay warm and calm while I work." "You cannot face the pack alone," Veltar protested. "They are too many, and you are just one human." Jake smiled. "Sir, being just one human is what I'm good at." He left the shelter and went back to the hull breach. Outside, the ice runners were waiting. They had learned that he was inside the ship, and they were patient enough to wait for him to come out. Jake counted 15 of them now. More had arrived during the fight, but Jake had advantages they didn't expect. He had brought more than weapons from the research station. He had brought knowledge. Dr. Hayes's research had revealed that ice runners communicated through subsonic calls below human hearing range. But the ship's communication array could detect and transmit on those frequencies. Jake connected his suits, computer to the ship's systems, and started recording the ice runners' calls. The creatures were coordinating their attack, assigning positions, and discussing tactics in their own language. Jake's suit translator couldn't decode it completely, but he could identify command patterns and warning signals. More importantly, he could disrupt them. Jake modified the ship's external speakers to broadcast white noise on the ice runner's communication frequency. When he activated it, the effect was immediate. The creatures outside began making confused sounds, bumping into each other and breaking their formation. While they were disoriented, Jake went to work on his real plan. He used the ship's emergency systems to vent heated air through the hull breaches, creating warm zones in the snow around the crash site. Then he planted thermal charges from his equipment at strategic points around the crater. The ice runners didn't understand what was happening. Their keen senses told them that something was wrong, but the communication jamming prevented them from coordinating a response. They milled around the crater in growing confusion. Jake waited until they were in position, then triggered the thermal charges. The explosions sent geysers of superheated steam into the air. The ice runners, adapted for extreme cold, couldn't handle the sudden temperature change. They fled the crater in panic, their pack discipline completely broken. Jake watched them disappear into the storm, then went back to the survivors. "The area is clear," he announced. "Time to go." Chief Clark was already helping the injured cadets prepare for evacuation. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked. "The research station. It has heat, air, and food. More importantly, it has a working communication array to call for real rescue." Veltar struggled to sit up. "Morrison, the station is 200 kilometers from here. These cadets cannot make such a journey." "They don't have to walk at all," Jake said. "I brought a sled." Over the next hour, Jake organized the evacuation with military precision. He used materials from the ship to build a makeshift stretcher for the most seriously injured. The thermal heaters were distributed to keep everyone warm during the journey. Chief Clark helped Jake rig a towing system that would let the stronger survivors help pull the sled. Zix Ala was so weak that her crystal structure was barely holding together. Jake wrapped her in thermal blankets and connected her to a portable heater. "Just hold on," he told her. "We're going to get you home." The crystal cadet's voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Why are you helping us? We treated you badly." Jake checked her thermal readings and adjusted the heater. "Because that's what humans do. We help people who need help." Thrumok overheard and clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "On my world, we have a saying. Honor is not in victory, but in the struggle for something greater than yourself." "What does that mean?" Jake asked. "It means I was wrong about humans. You are not primitives. You are warriors. Commander Veltar said nothing, but Jake could see him watching everything with his sharp yellow eyes. The reptilian officer was thinking hard about something. When everyone was ready, they began the long journey back to the research station. Jake pulled the sled, while the stronger cadets helped push and guide it over rough terrain. Chief Clark scouted ahead, looking for safe routes and watching for ice dash runners. It was slow going, but they were moving. And for the first time since arriving on Cathara 7, Jake felt like he might actually succeed. Behind them, the storm was getting worse. But ahead of them was shelter, warmth, and safety. All they had to do was keep moving. They had been traveling for 6 hours when Jake's motion detector started screaming. The ice runners had found them again. Dozens of them, moving in from all directions through the storm. The thermal attack at the crash site had only scattered them temporarily. Now they were back, and they were angry. "Contact front!" Chief Clark shouted from his scouting position. "Big pack, moving fast." Jake looked around at his group. The injured cadets could barely walk, let alone fight. Zixala was unconscious, her crystal form dim and fragile. Veltar was barely holding on, his reptilian features gray with pain and exhaustion. "Chief, get everyone to those rocks." Jake pointed to a cluster of boulders 30 meters away. "Set up a defensive position." "What about you?" Clark asked. "I'm going to slow them down." Jake grabbed his modified laser cutter and ran toward the approaching ice runners. The first ones emerged from the storm like white ghosts, their blue eyes glowing with predatory intelligence. These weren't the confused animals from the crater. This was a hunting pack in full attack mode. The lead ice runner leaped at Jake with claws extended. Jake ducked under it and swept his laser in a wide arc, catching 2 more creatures as they tried to flank him. They screamed and fell back, but others took their place immediately. "Morrison, fall back." Veltar's voice came through the communicator. "You cannot hold them alone." Jake kept fighting, using every dirty trick he had learned in the mining tunnels of Titan. When his laser overheated, he switched to the metal spikes he had welded to his boots, kicking at the creature's legs and joints. When they tried to surround him, he used the terrain to force them to attack from one direction. But there were too many of them. For every ice runner he drove off, 2 more appeared. They were learning his tactics, adapting to his fighting style. Soon they would overwhelm him completely. "Enough!" The voice came from behind him. Thromak had left the defensive position and was running toward the fight, his good arm holding a piece of metal from the sled. "Get back!" Jake shouted. "You're injured." "A Chitauri warrior does not abandon his battle brother," Thromak replied, swinging his makeshift weapon at the nearest ice runner. The insect cadet's arrival changed the dynamics of the fight. The ice runners had to split their attention between 2 targets, giving Jake breathing room to maneuver. Thromak fought with fierce determination despite his injured arm, using his natural agility to stay ahead of the creature's claws. But they were still outnumbered 3-1. "I have an idea," came Zixala's weak voice through the communicator. The crystal cadet had regained consciousness and was trying to stand up despite her weakness. "My people can resonate at specific frequencies. If I can amplify the communication, disruption ... do it." Jake shouted, cutting down another ice runner with his laser. Zixala began to glow brighter, her crystal structure humming with harmonic frequencies. The sound was barely audible to human ears, but the ice runners reacted immediately. They stopped their coordinated attack and began making confused, distressed calls. Chief Clark saw the opportunity. "All able cadets, form up. We push through while they're disoriented." What happened next surprised everyone, including Jake. Alien cadets who had looked down on him just days before now followed his lead without question. They formed a fighting line with Jake at the center. each species contributing their natural abilities to the group effort. Thrumok used his warrior training to guard the flanks. Another cadet, a tall, thin alien with 4 arms, used his reach. Advantage to keep the ice runners at bay. Even Commander Veltar, despite his injuries, provided tactical coordination from the rear. They fought their way through the confused pack of ice runners like a single organism. Jake called out targets and tactics, and the others responded instantly. It was the kind of coordination that usually took months of training to develop, but desperation and trust had forged it in minutes. When they broke through the ice runner pack, Jake looked back to see the creatures regrouping in the distance, but they were no longer following. Something about the coordinated resistance had convinced them to find easier prey. "Keep moving," Jake ordered. "They might change their minds." The rest of the journey to the research station passed without major incident. The alien cadets took turns helping pull the sled and supporting the injured. Jake noticed that they were no longer avoiding him or making disgusted faces. When Zixala's energy failed again, several cadets volunteered to carry her without being asked. Most surprising of all was Commander Veltar. The reptilian officer had stopped giving orders and started asking Jake's opinion on route selection and tactics. It was a subtle change, but Jake recognized it as respect. They reached the research station just as Jake's suit power was about to fail. The building's emergency airlock cycled them through in groups, and soon all 13 survivors were safe inside the heated structure. Jake immediately went to work setting up the communication array, while Chief Clark organized medical care for the injured. Within an hour, they had contacted the Academy and requested immediate evacuation. "Rescue ships are en route," Jake announced to the group. "ETA is 6 hours. A cheer went up from the cadets, weak but heartfelt. They had survived. As they waited for rescue, something remarkable happened. The species barriers that had seemed so important at the Academy began to dissolve. Thrumok shared Chitauri war stories with Chief Clark. Zigzala taught Jake how to read crystal light patterns. Even Veltar joined the conversations, his rigid military bearing relaxed for the first time since Jake had known him. "Morrison," Veltar said quietly, pulling Jake aside. "I owe you an apology." "Sir?" "I sent you on this mission expecting you to fail. I wanted to prove that humans did not belong in the Void Walker program." The commander's yellow eyes met Jake's directly. "I was wrong." "You were doing what you thought was right for the Academy," Jake said. "No, I was doing what I thought would protect my own prejudices." Veltar looked around at the mixed group of cadets working together. "You did not just survive Kithara 7, Morrison. You turned survival into leadership. You made us all better than we were alone." The rescue ships arrived exactly on schedule. As Jake watched his fellow cadets being evacuated to the medical bay, he felt a strange sense of completion. The mission had gone nothing like anyone had planned, but somehow it had accomplished more than anyone had hoped. Lieutenant Amy Brooks was waiting when Jake finally boarded the rescue ship. "I heard what happened," she said. "Veltar has recommended you for the Federation Medal of Valor." Jake shrugged. "I just did what needed doing." "That's exactly why you deserve it." Amy smiled. "Also, congratulations. You're officially the first human to complete the Void Walker program." 3 months later, Jake stood in the Academy's main auditorium wearing his dress uniform. The Federation Medal of Valor felt heavy on his chest, but not as heavy as the responsibility he now carried. Commander Veltar approached the podium to address the new class of cadets. The commander had recovered fully from his injuries, and his voice was strong as he spoke. "The Void Walker program exists to train elite survival specialists," Veltar said. "But survival is not just about individual skill. It is about the ability to bring out the best in others, even under the worst circumstances." The commander's yellow eyes found Jake in the audience. This year, we learned that lesson from an unexpected teacher, a human from a death world who showed us that the strongest survive not by standing alone, but by lifting others up. Jake looked around at his fellow graduates. Thromak gave him a Chitauri honor salute. Zingzala's crystal form sparkled with friendly patterns. Chief Clark nodded approvingly from the back row. They had all changed on Kithara 7. The aliens had learned that humans were not primitive savages, and Jake had learned that being different was not the same as being alone. After the ceremony, Jake found himself standing by the great window overlooking Nexus Prime. The gas giant storms still swirled in their eternal dance, but they looked less chaotic now, more like a system where different elements work together to create something beautiful. Ready for your next assignment? Amy Brooks joined him at the window. What did you have in mind? Jake asked. Mixed species deep space reconnaissance. Long-range missions with crews from 6 different worlds. Amy grinned. Think you can handle being the only human on a ship full of aliens? Jake thought about Kithara 7, about ice runners and impossible odds, and people who had become friends through shared struggle. He thought about the mining tunnels of Titan and the lesson they had taught him. That survival was not about being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. Survival was about never giving up and never leaving anyone behind. I can handle it, Jake said. After all, being the only human is what I'm good at.